for the Umbrella Arts and Environment program, and I am the program assistant. This is the Go Outdoors public art installation, and this idea was originally conceived by Nancy Lippy, but she got the idea from the Plein Air project that was originally in New York City along the High Line, and she brought it to Concord along the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail.
I was approached by Nancy Lippy of the Umbrella, and she then went to the advisory committee to say, we would like to do this art installation. It's a great opportunity. It would engage people along the path. And her concept was actually developed a year ago, but I think it's most fortuitous that it was installed in this time period, during this global pandemic.
Okay, well, they did a similar show on the High Line. Oh, maybe, I want to say it was like 4 years ago or so, maybe somewhere in there. And it was really very nice. It was really wonderful because not only were you walking the trail, you stopped and it was a conversation. So I think it works the same way on the Bruce Freeman Trail. It gives people a moment to just stop. It becomes a conversation, even if it's only with yourself at this point. But it's sort of having punctuation along the trail rather than just blindly walking straight ahead.
It gives people who are out along the trail, out in nature, an opportunity to see art, to experience art, and to maybe have a conversation about it or to see things in a new way. So I'm really delighted that this has worked out the way it has, and hope it would continue.
So for me, public art is easily accessible to everybody. Language barriers, socioeconomic barriers, like those shouldn't really exist with access to public art.
We do a lot of public art at the Umbrella. The Art Ramble is another really good example of some of the public art we do, and so this was a different version of public art that would bring a lot of different artists together, painting these recycled doors. So we got a lot of doors donated for the project. And once we partnered with the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, that was when the themes for all of the doors came together.
In the early 90s, I was handed a document called the Feasibility Study for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, which was dated 1987, by the person who was then the Natural Resources Director, Dan Monahan. And he said, this is something that I think the town would be interested in the future. So I suggested that maybe it should be part of a capital plan, and I added it to the capital plan on several years, but it never got funded until 2002, when a group of Concord residents got together and said, we're going to form the Friends of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. And they raised the initial funding to conduct a feasibility study for engineering and the environmental impacts of a trail along this former railroad right-of-way. The railroad right-of-way actually didn't end until, this portion anyway, till the late 80s. The southern portion, south of the West Concord depot, had stopped active use in the early 80s. So it's a fairly recently abandoned railroad right-of-way. We had a committee called the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Advisory Committee, and they've been actively involved in all the details and working with the community on what does this trail look like. What was really fun is interpreting some of the history of the trail. There are some historic markers along the way that talk about the history of the trail or what was going on in the area. And that was developed by a man named Henry Koitman, and working with our historical commission and a member of the advisory committee. So we had this wonderful little collaborative going on, developed some great graphics, found some wonderful pictures, and really captured, I think, the history of West Concord and of the railroad itself. Well, the purpose purpose of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail was to be multimodal, and because we have the West Concord train station just a half mile down the road, we felt it was important to install the vehicle charging station here. Our light plant, Concord Municipal Light Plant, received a grant to install charging stations, and they were looking for public locations where it could easily be done, and this was one of them.
Through them looking for artists to paint doors over the summer, or I guess over the spring. And it just so happened that I had a friend who used to work here, so she forwarded it to me, and it seemed, I'm a public artist, I do a lot of work outdoors, so it seemed like a really perfect fit for me. So I applied, and they selected me as one of their, I think there are 3 or 4 artists involved. So I came here and picked up the doors and brought them back, and immediately went into the 2 months of quarantine. So I had a really nice kind of month-long project during quarantine to keep me sane.
The theme generally, it's a very broad theme, just the idea of joyful things that will make people go outside or inspire them to spend time outdoors. And so a lot of the doors have that natural theme running through them, and also include, some of them emphasize outdoor activities, but generally speaking, they're just meant to be really joyful and creative, and be beautiful besides all that.
So all of my work is based on the environment and our relationship with the environment as humans. So the relationship between humans and non-humans, and bringing nature. I often work within city limits, so murals within cities, so bringing nature into the city. But for this project, I just wanted it to be, I just wanted to paint exactly what I wanted to paint, and they were allowing me to do that. So my favorite subject to paint is birds, so I chose to work with that theme. And the other one was just the one with the figure in it was, as part of being in quarantine, I wanted to challenge myself to start expanding and start to paint people. I don't really paint people, and we are an animal, so we should be included in.
We walk all the time, and there's lots of footpaths, but the idea of having a trail that you could safely walk in the winter too would be really, it was like, that's great. And I have a dog, so I walk the dog. It made going to the center of West Concord easier. Mm-hmm. So it just was like something that I was pretty excited about. And that fact that it actually happened after all these years was amazing. So it seemed like a good fit for me. And so I sent a few drawings to Nancy, and whoever the committee was chose all 3 of them.
I've done a lot of work with whales, and I'm working with the Ocean Alliance up in Gloucester in a few months. So I was starting to research whales at that point. The birds, so I spent my quarantine in Plum Island. I was very lucky to be able to be up there. My parents live up there, so I was biking into the bird sanctuary there every day, and also made it a quarantine goal to learn more about birds. So I was just whoever was flying around, I was trying to identify, and so the birds that I chose for the piece with the circles are birds that I learned about while I was in Plum Island. And the other one is a barn owl with some, I think they're called beach rose hips.
The original drawings had nothing to do with the coronavirus, but the execution of them had a lot to do with the coronavirus. And it was like amazing timing. It was a really nice thing to be able to focus on. I could work out of my house. I could set them outside and work outside. And the trail was right there. So it's right in the environment. And of course, the trail was being used heavily by people that wanted to get outside. Everybody was home.
I really appreciate the support at a time when a lot of other places were pulling back on supporting the arts, and it tends to be one of the first things that kind of goes out the window in a project. So yeah, I really appreciate the commitment to fostering the artistic.
I I took a more literal interpretation than a lot of people did. I noticed that a lot of the artists used the doors as a canvas, but I tended to use the doors as doors. And I just liked the whole idea of indoors and outdoors. And that was sort of the theme of it, was to go outdoors. And so it's like trying to get this, how do I relate to doors? And so very much any kind of a wooden surface. I guess maybe it's from walking in the woods up here in Maine, but I relate it to where they started. And so it's like if I had had the ability to do it in more time, I would have added roots to it. But the whole idea that our wooden doors and wooden structures started in the forest. And so I thought, now it's going in the forest. So I love the idea of putting the door back in the forest and it starts to regrow its branches. It's a little bit like when you see asphalt and you see a little weed or a plant growing through a crack in the asphalt. It's like nature takes its own back. And so that was sort of where that concept came, was if a door made of wood had its choice, would it go back to the woods? And so that's where that one came from. And the runners, I wanted something that was a little bit humorous and that people could relate to. There's so many runners on that trail. And the dog is just my personal experience. I've always had a dog, and I've always had a dog that wants to go for walkies. So it's the dog, leading me to the great outdoors. And there's so many dog walkers, again, on that trail that, I tried to put things that might appeal broadly to other people that they could relate to with regard to doors and what. And so that was basically my goal. And so those 3 images are what I ended up with.
So it took a while to actually arrive here and actually have doors out in the world. But the process from idea to execution included writing the call for art, putting the call for out to artists, local area artists, and then distributing the doors. And by the time we got to distributing the doors, it was February, and it was February or March, right before things were starting to shut down. And ultimately, I think a lot of the artists created the art that they had initially submitted. They created that art during quarantine and during the lockdown. And a month ago was when we did the installation. And so that was, also around the time that we were coming out of lockdown. And so these doors ended up coming out of this really dark period. It was largely up to the artists. If they only wanted to do one door, Rebecca only did one door, so that's totally fine. And she, I think, put a lot of effort into creating this one beautiful piece. I think with Sophy and with Howie Green, they each did 3 doors apiece, and I think that's actually really great, because that means that even though all of the doors are different in a way, there is some cohesion between them just based on the style of the artist. 3 or 4 basic parts to the installation. There's the 2x4, the rebar, the bracket, and then the screws that we were using to connect the bracket to the door, and then to connect the bracket to the 2x4. And so we had a lot of help from Ron, who is our facilities guy over at the Umbrella, and he helped conceive the idea and helped us install everything.
The way it's been installed and the information that's been provided to just keep people informed, and it also keeps our artists working, and that to me is really, really important. So I think it's been a really wonderful. The majority of people have just exclaimed about how beautiful it is, how wonderful it is, and they've really appreciated that addition to the trail experience.